You can share your PowerPoint now.
Right.
And now I start recording.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it visible now?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Shall I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I hope you hear me well. I'll make a short presentation about Christianity and Islam in Bulgaria. And this is the title of my presentation, Christianity and Islam in Bulgaria between history, mythology, and reality. Bulgaria is a unique phenomenon in the history of the world. For nearly 1,500 years, the Bulgarian state has been present on the world map without changing its name. History does not know another country that has existed for so long under the same name. This long history is intertwined with many different events. It remembers periods of greatness and fall, of power and slavery, of construction and ruin. From a religious point of view, this story is also very interesting. Bulgarians replaced paganism with Christianity from early on, although in general, Bulgaria as an empire officially accepted Christianity in 865. But history remembers several Bulgarian states, and not all of them accepted Christianity as their religion. You may see on this map the great old Bulgarian, 5th, 6th century, on the map of Europe. It started from where now is Ukraine and Russia, north part of the Black Sea. During the 7th century, this old Bulgaria, which you see on the map, created by the Khan Kubrat, divided or organized 3 different Bulgarian states, and they appeared on the historical map. 2 of them under the same name, Bulgaria, and the 3rd one under the name of Azaria. On this map, you will see how this old Bulgaria spread, and the Bulgarians went into a different parts of Europe and Asia. They reach even Italy. The first 2, as I said, keep the name Bulgaria. The one was Volga, Bulgaria, on the territory of Russia. And the second one, the Danube, Bulgaria, which exists until nowadays. King or Khan Kubrat has several sons, and even he wanted to keep them together, to keep them united. They decided after his death to split. The oldest one, Bayan, remained on the same place where was his fatherland. But the youngest, for example, Asparuch, if you may see the point marker, went to Danube, while the Kotrak went north and organized the Volga, Bulgaria, while Altsek went to nowadays Italy. These three Bulgarias in different periods officially accepted one of the three world monotheistic religions as their confession. The state of Asparuh, which still exists today, the modern Bulgaria, accepted Christianity in 865. The state here. The state of Kotrak or the Volga Bulgaria, which remains in history until the 16th century, when was finally captured by the Russians in the year 922, accepted Islam as official religion. The third state, which remained in the history as the Khazar Khaganate or Khazaria, and in which the Bulgarians were the predominant population, adopted Judaism as an official confession in 730. Here on the PowerPoint, you may see the treasure of the first Bulgarian king, and you may recognize here the sign of a cross and the charisma, the name of Christ, because in the 5th century, the first Bulgarian kings, they were Christians, but they didn't impose Christianity on the whole Bulgarian. It happened, as I said, in the 9th century. One of the sons of the first Bulgarian king, Kubrat, Asparuh, during the year 680-681, came down to the Danube River and organized the state in which most of you know as Bulgaria, and which still exists under the same name. But, sorry, his brother, Kotrak, went north, as I said, and organized this great state of Volga Bulgaria, which even during the Chinggis Khan managed to defeat him, and which exists until the 16th century, when the newborn Russian state, or the, how to say, the beginning of the Russian Empire, led to capture of Volga Bulgaria. And this state of Bulgarians formally adopted Islam in 922 during the reign of Emir Almush. Here we have not a photo, but a picture of this man of Volga Bulgaria, the ruler of Volga Bulgaria, who adopted for the state Islam in 902. Nowadays, if some of you have been to Tatarstan, there is no nation, there is no people known as Tatars. Tatars, Russian called the Mongols, and also the Bulgarian Muslims in this region. And they have a great Muslim heritage, a really wonderful mosques and other buildings. The third state, as I said, was the state of Khazar or Khazaria, and the major population of Khazaria were the Bulgarians and also some related nomad tribes who, as I said already in the beginning of 8th century, in 730, they adopted Judaism. So the Bulgarians simultaneously confessed the three major or the three world monotheistic religions. The state on the Danube became Christian. The state Khazaria adopted Judaism, and Volga, Bulgaria, a bit north, adopted Islam. About the Khazars, some signs which were found during the digging, the archaeological digging in nowadays Ukraine. You may see my presentation, and also the Joseph, the king of one of the king of the Khazars, who wrote about 906. You ask us also in your epistle, on what people, of what family, and of what tribe are you? Know that we are descendant from Japhet, the prophet Japhet, through his son Togamash. I have found in the genealogical books of many ancestors that Togamash had 10 sons. These are their names. The eldest was Shur, the second Tauris, the third Tavar, the fourth was, the fifth Bizan, so on and so on. And you see the ninth was Bulgar. They are the mythical founders of the tribes that once lived in the neighborhood of the Black and Caspian Sea. I am descendants of the Khazars, the seventh son. So the tribes of these 10 sons united and organized the Khazarian Khaganate, one of the mighty empires of the Middle Ages. Generally now, we will speak about modern Bulgaria, the Bulgarian which was found in the 7th century in the region of Danube River, and the Bulgarian which most of you know, which, thanks God, still exists on the map as Bulgaria. And this state, as I already said, formally adopted Christianity in 865 during the reign of the Saint Tsar Boris I. Of course, nowadays Bulgaria is quite small, but during the time of Boris, it reached Budapest, the entire territory of nowadays Romania, also almost the entire territory of Serbia, Northern Macedonia, Albania, Montenegro, and so on, and even part of nowadays Greek and Turkey. But of course, as in Finland and in other states, the borders are something which frequently were changing. So that's happened with Bulgaria as well. This state, the Danube Bulgaria, encounters with Islam in the beginning of early Middle Ages. As we saw, there were contacts or there were wars between the Khazars and the Arab Arab tribes or the Arab Caliphate, but the Arabs were trying to reach Europe not only in the area between Black and Caspian Sea. In the year 717, with the mighty army of about 250,000 soldiers, they siege the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople. And it was matter of days Constantinople to be captured. And in that particular crucial for the Eastern Roman Empire period, when the city was sieged under the command of Maslama. Maslama was brother of the Caliph Suleiman, the ruler of the Arab Caliphate. And in this particular crucial moment for the Eastern Roman Empire, for Constantinople, and for Europe itself, Bulgarian king Tervelus, who was a Christian, came to help and managed in a fierce battle to really destroy the Arab army and to lift the siege of Constantinople and to stop this opportunity of Arabs to penetrate Europe from its eastern part. That's why you may see on the PowerPoint presentation here, King Tervelus, which is also known as Tribelius or Saint Theoctis, because in the end of his life, he became a monk. He went to a monastery, and in the annals of the Vatican, he is under the name Saint Tribelius. And it's one of the forgotten hero, the saviors of Europe from Islam. The second one, which is you're probably more familiar with him, is the Karl Martel or Charles Martel. Because 15 years later, when the Umayyads, the Arabs of the Umayyad, would try to advance into Europe, but this time from the west, from Spain, but they were stopped in the Battle of Poitiers in 732 by this hero, by this great man, Charles Martel. And from that time until the 15th century, there was no more tries of the Arabs to conquer or to enter Europe. Unfortunately, on the European map, some centuries later will appear another tribe which has no direct relation to the Arabs, but they adopted Islam from them, the tribe of the Turks. Turks somehow during 11th, 12th century, because of the contacts with the Arab Caliphate, adopted Islam, and when they started pushing the Eastern Roman Empire into its end, they were already Muslims. Initially, that were the leading tribe was the tribe of Seljuk, but later they were defeated, and the leading tribe became the Ottoman one, which later, after capturing Constantinople enter into the history, world history, as the tribe which organized the Ottoman Empire, one of the biggest and mightiest empires which our world knows. And here on this map, you may see how big was a really Ottoman Empire, one part of Europe, the whole Middle East, and not small part of North Africa. In the middle of 15th century, Bulgaria and the entire Balkans were already under the control of the Turks, and they became part of this huge Ottoman Empire. For nearly 4.5 centuries, the Balkans, and especially Bulgarian, coexisted with the Muslims peacefully, and this is the true for the first 2.5 centuries, and not so peacefully during the last 2 centuries of the empire. And I will tell you why, but the Bulgarians really suffered a lot during the last 2 centuries from the Ottoman Turks, from the Muslims, because in this period, the period of decline of the empire, when the central power was not able to control the entire empire, there were many lost wars, there were many local rebellions, there were many bandits which were sacking a local Christian population. And this period, by the way, gave birth to a huge mythology among the Balkan, the people in the Balkans, stories about the cruelty of the Muslims, about the cruelty of Islam, and so on and so on. Part of these stories are really true, and they're, as I said, fruit of the 18th and 19th centuries. But we should also know something on which we keep silence here on the Balkan, that there was no empire as the Ottoman Empire, so tolerant empire. The world before didn't know such a tolerant empire. And nowadays, there is, as I said, huge mythology among the people who live in the Balkans, and they said they wanted to convert all of us into Islam. They wanted to slaughter us, and so on and so on. That if they really wanted to do it, they could do it for several months or for several weeks, because they were really a huge power. But no, they were trying to find a proper model of coexistence between Christians and Muslims, and they managed to do it through the Millet system. Of course, the Christians were all the time with, let's say, 75% of the rights of the Muslims, but they were able to live peacefully and to um, um, develop their properties, their own trade. And if you imagine this huge empire, Ottoman Empire, it was in the Middle Ages, something like European Union. It was a huge territory on which you can freely do trades. And Bulgarians, for example, were the best uh, farmers in Egypt, and they were the best cheese makers in Egypt. So they can freely travel through the whole empire to sell their goods, also to go to different places and to develop farming or whatever else. So this period is really period of a peaceful coexistence. But you know, every empire, when it reach the end of its existence, the things are getting really chaotic. Bulgaria was liberated from the Ottoman Empire and became again independent state in 1878. And this period for almost 60, 70 years was period of mutual understanding and really good peaceful coexistence between Christians and Muslims in Bulgaria. And you may see this typical Bulgarian village, uh, the Muslims, but not only Muslims, because the first year Bulgarians also wear this hat, which is typical for the Ottoman Empire. They sit, they talk, they drink together, and so on and so on. But unfortunately, this period came into an end when, uh, after the end of or a little bit before the end of the Second World War, uh, when the Communist Party, the Communist regime, came into power in Bulgaria, September the 9th, 1944. This fundamentally changed everything. The church, which had saved the Bulgarians from assimilation into the vast Ottoman Empire, became the main ideological enemy of the new artist power. And this led into the fierce persecution against the church, uh, which led into the violent death of hundreds of clergymen and monks. Christian churches were closed, destroyed, under the slogan of one people, one nation. A fierce campaign against Muslims also began. History was interpreted in favor of the new ideology. All Muslims were declared Bulgarians, who, according to the communist propaganda, were converted at various times forcibly into Islam by the Ottomans. So they were forced to change their fate, and now the task of the communists is to bring back them into the Bulgarian nations, into their original faith. Even they were fighting the church, they somehow prefer these Muslims to become, how to say, atheist Christians instead of staying Muslim believers. And there were, with the coming into power of the communist regime, immediately started several campaigns for changing the names of the Bulgarian Muslims. The last one, which started in 1984, for almost 5 years, led into the so-called Great Escape. More than 500,000 Muslims were forced to leave Bulgaria and to go to Turkey. And you may see on these pictures how these people were carrying all their stuff and were on the border here. This is the border with Turkey, and they were expelled from the country because they didn't want to change their names. They didn't want to betray their faith. Here we see a camp in Turkey, tents where these Bulgarians were actually living for quite a long time. People who didn't have cars were actually becoming horses to pull their stuff to the border with Turkey. Thanks God, in 1989, there was an end of the communist regime and a new year even in the relations between Christians and Muslims in Bulgaria started. And nowadays, you know that the Balkans are always a hot spot on the map of Europe, especially with these conflicts between Christians and Muslims, especially in the territory of the former Yugoslavia, where a huge Muslim population also lives. But with all these local conflicts, with this suffering in end of the 20th and the beginning of 21st century, after the liberation of Bulgaria from the communist yoke, Bulgaria became really one of the good patterns, one of the good examples of mutual, peaceful coexisting between Christians and Muslims. And we hope and we pray that it will continue forever. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I wasn't too long, but the story is really more than 1,500 years, and it's difficult to put it in several slides and in a few pages. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Karavaltchev, for this very inspiring presentation. And I have to admit that, at least for me, there were quite a lot of new pieces of information.
They can't hear.
But the microphone is on. This on.
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Because okay. Yeah. Do you have any questions or whatever to ask? If I
Do you have?
answer? Yes.
When was this big escape? I didn't.
It happened between 1985 and 1989. for 4 years, last century, end of last century, 1985, 1989.
Yeah. Please.
But the Great Escape, one or two, a few years before the liberation.
No,
From
few
Russia.
years before the liberation from the communists,
Yeah,
not
few
before
years.
the liberation from the Ottomans, before the liberation from the communists, because this was part of the communist plan under the slogan, as I said, one nation, one people, or how to say, in Bulgarians should live only Bulgarians. And if you are Bulgarian, you should be Christian, or better, should be atheist or communist.
Any other comments,
Very
questions?
Very interesting, yes.
So I guess, Professor, now we are on the map concerning the Great Escape.
The Great Escape was a name given by the Bulgarians to this mass exodus of the Muslims from Bulgaria. The people who were happy because you may see when these people leave the country, their properties were taken by the state and was given to the local Bulgarians, and they were happy, and they called this the great excursion, or the great trip, or the great vacation, or great holiday, or as you want. But for the normal Bulgarians who see this tragedy, because it was really tragedy, 500,000 people suffering on the road to Turkey, losing everything, um, this was uh, uh, not able to give a proper name of this tragedy. But formally, this great escape was given by the mass media in Bulgaria to defend the deeds of the Communist Party, which organized this persecution and this actually deportation of the people from Bulgaria.
Can you tell us something about the actual situation between Christian and Muslim?
Today,
Yeah,
Yeah, today.
today, thanks God, as I said, after the changes when the Communist Party was removed from power, the process of reconciliation between the Christians and Muslims started, and immediately, even on the first free elections in the country, there was a Muslim party which is called a Movement for Democracy and Rights. Leader was one very good politician confessing Islam, and the Muslims in Bulgaria joined this party, which from then until nowadays is always presented in the Bulgarian parliaments, and behind them about 10% of the population. And according to the different census made in Bulgaria, 10% of the Bulgarian population are confessing Islam. So we may say that most of the Muslims are supporting this party, which is represented in the parliament and is very important in the political life of the Bulgarians. And from that particular day, 10th of November, 1989, when the communists were removed from power, are really very bright days for the Islam and the Christian-Muslim relations started for Bulgaria. Nowadays, we don't have any problems